We've talked a little bit about how the church came to be in Armadale,
Yep.
how the church was started here in Western Australia, and I'd love for you to share some of that history with us today.
Okay, well, the church in Armadale started around 1984 with the work of Brother Jerry Cutter. And he came here. He was looking for people who were interested in the gospel, and he found a couple, the Hosking family, who lived in Armadale, and then they started worshipping there with just Jerry and his late wife Pat and the Hoskings, and they met in local council buildings. But Jerry had moved from Kalgoorlie, where he had first come to preach the gospel.
And where is that in relation to Armadale?
Kalgoorlie is a gold mining town, famous for having the richest square mile in the world, and that's where the church first came in Western Australia. Very interesting story how it came about. There was a brother who worked for the Hughes Tool Company, previously owned by the famous Howard Hughes, who was an engineer designing drilling equipment. And he was asked by his boss to come out to the gold mine to help set up this drilling equipment. And he said it wasn't possible because he had no way to worship. Well, this man had told him, it's okay, you can take Hughes money, buy a ticket and fly to Malaysia if you need to.
Wow.
But this man, Brother McFarlane, wasn't going to take just the easy route. So when he arrived in Sydney, he used the phone book that we used to have back then and looking for churches of Christ in Western Australia. He had no luck. But then when the plane arrived, took him to Perth, he once again did that. And he found one phone number that he couldn't get it answered. Well, it's an 8-hour drive to Kalgoorlie.
From Perth.
From Perth.
Uh-huh.
And the man who was taking him, he was quite a character himself. And he took him to Perth. Now, they still had another 4 hours drive from Kalgoorlie to get to the mine site.
Wow.
But they stopped for lunch in Kalgoorlie, and Brother McFarlane worked the phones again. And he ended up speaking to a minister of a congregation, and what Brother McFarlane was looking for was a Church of Christ that used 1 cup and 1 loaf. And the answer he got, well, there is a maverick that I know that you might be able to speak to. So they went to this man's house, and this man is a man by the name of John Burt. And they eventually made contact with him after waiting for several hours for him to come home. And after
remind me what year this was?
This would have been 83,
okay.
1983,
okay.
So quite a while back now. And so they spent an hour on the driveway before Brother McFarlane was invited in, and another 2 hours discussing the question. All the time, this man who was the driver was waiting for them, and quite happy to do that. And it was decided that this was a family who were members of the Church of Christ, but had been using multiple cups. And they agreed, for Brother McFarlane's sake, that they would worship with 1 cup while he was there. So that meant that he just required to travel the 4 hours to Kalgoorlie to worship with
Still
us.
better than driving all the way down to Perth and catching a flight up to Malaysia.
Oh yeah,
yes,
exactly. So anyway, his time in Perth was up, but his company wanted him to go back and spend 2 or 3 months with his wife. And so he approached the brethren at the 21st Street congregation in Oklahoma City about this opportunity. And they decided that they would send out Jerry Cutter and Bob Laddermilk, with the view that possibly that Bob Laddermilk would come with his family and work there as an evangelist. Now that wasn't quite how it worked out. Bob wasn't able to do that, but Jerry ended up moving over with his wife Pat. And they were working in Kalgoorlie for a year. And Brother McFarlane, I've got some papers that he wrote. He said there was up to 30 people in attendance.
Wow.
In the church there. At that time, Bruce Word and his wife Linda moved over to help with the work. And
were they from Oklahoma also?
They were from Denver at that stage.
Oh, okay.
They were in Denver. And Jerry then decided to move down to Perth, the large centre. Kalgoorlie is just a small town.
Right.
And he thought there was more opportunities in Perth.
Yeah.
And so the Words stayed in Kalgoorlie, and Jerry moved down to Perth, where he met this family from Armidale. Interestingly,
I think probably a lot of Americans don't realize just how huge Western Australia is, but how most of the population is just centered around the Perth area.
Well, at the moment, the entire population of Western Australia is 2.5 million. 2.25 are in Perth.
Yeah.
And so we're a vast state,
Yeah.
but with a small population outside of the capital city.
Okay.
So the family I told you about, they'd actually come to know the Church of Christ by visiting their family in Kalgoorlie,
Okay.
who lived next door to the meeting place where the church was meeting in Kalgoorlie.
Big state, small world.
Exactly. And so Jerry was given their contact details. They met up, they decided to worship, and then in a short time, the husband and wife were baptized.
Wow.
And became the first members here in Armidale.
Okay, so did they live in Perth or did they live in Armidale?
They lived in Armidale.
Okay.
And so that was why Jerry moved from where he was to Armidale.
And what year was that?
That was 84.
84.
Yeah.
And so the church has existed in Armidale consistently since that time.
Yes, indeed. And Jerry continued to visit for many, many years after he went back.
So other than Brother Jerry, and you mentioned Brother Bob Loudermilk, who else has come to this part of the world to do evangelistic work over the years?
Okay, so Bruce and Linda Word came out to be with Jerry. When Jerry left, Glenn and Reba Osmond came to replace Jerry, and they came to Armidale. Now, they would go up and visit the brethren in Kalgoorlie, but that congregation was shrinking down till finally there was two very, very old members. And that was it. And
was that just because the gold mining was sort of coming to fruition, coming to its end?
No, it was just maybe the excitement that they first had was no longer. This is before my time.
Yeah.
And so I don't really know the whys. Excuse me, these people left. But it was a stepping stone for the work in Armidale.
Sure, yeah. And what year was it that Glenn and Reba came?
They came. It would have been in, I'm thinking, 86.
86.
Yeah.
And how long did they stay?
They stayed for 3.5 years, and their youngest daughter, Sephra, was born here.
Yes.
So we're very proud of her as our fellow Australian.
Oh, of course. So, Brother Glenn, his family, has any other American preacher or family moved here to live here?
David and Paula Osborne were here for 2 years.
Okay.
After Glenn and Reba left, there was about a year or so where we had no American evangelists, and the Stans moved over for a short time to Armidale.
But then, of course, since then, many preachers have come to hold meetings.
Oh, we've had many preachers. We've had Mike Criswell, Clint DeFrance. We've had, now it's really taxing my brain to think of them all. But we've had many come over yourself.
Well, that's great. So now, church has been here about over 30 years, well over 30 years. What do you think that the future of the church in Western Australia looks like? For a lot of Americans who don't necessarily know very much about Australian culture or the reception of the gospel for people who live in this part of the world. Maybe, as you think about the next 10, 20, or 30 years, what do you think that the church looks like here in Western Australia?
Well, that's a really good question, and it really is a case of looking into a crystal ball. But I believe in making plans and trusting in the Lord that His will come about. One of the exciting things about working here is that the congregation is very evangelistic. We have a goal, a plan to spread the gospel locally, nationally, and internationally. And we've been involved in evangelistic works in around the Perth area and beyond, in the major eastern state cities and overseas as well. About 4 years ago, we had one of our plans come to fruition. We had set ourselves a goal to establish another congregation in the Perth area within 3 years, and so we were working towards that. Now, it didn't work out how we planned, but there was a congregation started in the small country town of Narrogin, which is about 2 hours drive away from us. And we continue to help that little congregation going. So we envision the Lord, if He permits us, helping us to start new congregations elsewhere in this state and elsewhere in Australia. We've got a huge field that's waiting for workers to go out.
Absolutely. And one of the exciting things too about the church in Armidale is you have a whole crop of young people who are coming of age now. They're entering adulthood or in their early 20s, and they are Christians and seem excited about the work, and that's very exciting. I mean, you can see the life cycle of a lot of congregations when they start to skew older. It seems that things maybe are coming to the end, but that doesn't seem to be the case at all here in Armidale.
No, and I think the future looks bright here. As the world looks at things, we're small. But the emphasis now is on the mega churches.
Right.
But I don't read anywhere in the Bible that that's God's emphasis. God's emphasis is on faithful Christians. And I tell the brethren here, you sometimes feel that the church is small. At the time that God first went to Noah, I asked him, how many people were faithful in the world? Generally they say 8. No. At that stage, there was only one.
We only know of one.
Exactly.
Right.
But he converted his wife, he converted his children, who weren't even born at that stage.
Right.
And that was enough.
Yeah.
And so as long as we remain faithful and are working like Noah did, that's enough.
Yeah.
And so I feel very positive about the future for the work here in Australia.